Hey guys, this is day 3 of your Psychopathy Notes. You are going to need the PDF note-taking guide. So just in review quickly, we learned about the definition of psychopathy, how it is a personality disorder designated by these very specific set of characteristics. So today, finally, you're going to get the comprehensive list of all of these things that we're looking for when we're trying to diagnose someone as a psychopath. There are 2 halves to the Psychopathy Checklist. Remember, this is the tool that Dr. Hare developed, which is a series of interviews and questions that we ask when we're trying to diagnose a psychopath. So the checklist is separated into Factor 1 and Factor 2. Factor 1 is called the Interpersonal Affective Scale. And this side of the scale has everything to do with interpersonal relationships. How do psychopaths interact with other people, and how do they show or not show their emotions? One of the main characteristics of a psychopath is that they have superficial charm and they are glib, which means they're really, really good at talking to people, kind of like fake it till you make it. They're smooth talkers, like when a salesman tries to get you to buy a car, they just keep going and going and going, try to convince people to do whatever it is they want to do. They are grandiose. They make themselves seem more important than they actually are. There have been psychopaths that have given themselves false credentials, degrees from college that they actually didn't get. They'll say that they're very important people and try to build themselves up so that others will trust them, which leads into the next characteristic, pathological lying. They will lie and lie and lie and lie and lie until eventually they get caught. And what do you think happens when they get caught? They actually end up just fessing up, because more often than not, they want the credit for what they've done, if that makes sense. They're also very cunning and manipulative. They're very good at being underhanded and working their way around systems and through loopholes to get people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. One of the biggest characteristics of psychopaths is that they don't feel remorse or guilt. So they do all of these terrible things, and we know that they don't feel guilty about it because they continue to commit crimes and they continue to hurt people without regard for any of their feelings. They have a shallow affect, which means they tend to not show emotions on their face. They're very callous and they lack empathy, so they don't feel sorry for someone because of whatever it is. And they also tend to not immediately accept responsibility for their actions. So this means that they tend to always place the blame on someone else. So they'll own up to what they've done, but they'll say, well, it was because of my childhood, or it was because my mother was horrible to me, or because I have mental issues of some sort. The second half of our psychopathy checklist scale is called Factor 2, the social deviance scale. And this part of the scale has to do specifically with behaviors that psychopaths exhibit. So one of those behaviors is need for stimulation. They tend to get very bored with kind of mundane daily things that an average person would do. And so they seek ways to make them feel excited, because remember, they don't really feel emotions. So anything that gets their adrenaline going is what they want to do, no matter the consequences. They also tend to have a very parasitic lifestyle. They use others to get what they need, whether that's money or a place to stay, or so on and so forth. They tend to not have any realistic long-term goals. So they might set out to say, I want to be president, But one, that's probably not realistic, and two, they don't want to put in the work to get there. So they might have goals, but they're not realistic goals. Psychopaths are also very impulsive and irresponsible. They tend to be sexually promiscuous. They have multiple partners and therefore lots of short-term relationships because they don't want to make that commitment to another person. A lot of psychopaths have a lot of antisocial tendencies. They're kind of loners. They like to, look out for number one kind of thing. They have poor behavior controls, so if they have, anger issues, they're not sure how to rein those in and control them. They also tend to have early behavior issues, so we're going to learn about McDonald's triangle and those three key elements like bedwetting, fire setting, and animal cruelty. Psychopaths often exhibit some of those as children and even as adults. They tend to have a lot of tendencies to commit minor crimes when they're younger. So a lot of them will end up in juvie or some kind of minor detention center of some kind. And on top of that, when they get released from those places, they tend to violate their parole. So on your notes, you're going to see revocation of conditional release. That's what that means. They tend to have their parole rights revoked because they continue to commit crimes or not check in with their officers or things like that. Psychopaths also are very versatile in the types of crimes they commit. So they tend to not commit just one type of crime. So they might commit robbery and assault and whatever else in a series of crimes rather than just focusing on one thing. One of the last things we need to discuss in this unit is the difference between psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder. So all of us have these antisocial tendencies sometimes. We want to be by ourselves for a while, or we just want to take a minute just alone. Whereas a psychopath would rather be alone all the time. A psychopath doesn't want to rely on others for anything unless it's for personal gain. So there are kind of fine lines between these two things because they are both personality disorders, but psychopathy has an antisocial element that's way, way higher than someone with just ASPD. So let's kind of talk about that. Somebody on the low end of the psychopathy scale would be manipulators, people who run business scams, narcissists, underhanded businessmen, anyone who commits a drug-related crime or a victimless crime like vandalism, where nobody's actually harmed as far as a person is concerned. Somebody on the medium, kind of in the middle of psychopathy, would be people who commit multiple offenses, people who use bribery, people who use blackmail, people who commit hate crimes, repeat offenders and sexual offenders fall kind of in the middle of the scale. Someone on the high end of the psychopathy scale, those are going to be your terrorists, your serial killers, stalkers, extortionists, people who commit very, very violent crimes or even cult-related crimes. So the more serious offenders that would tend to have the more serious consequences if they were to be caught, those are going to be your high-end psychopaths. So remember, super important that psychopaths are almost always antisocial, but not everyone who is antisocial is a psychopath. So remember the psychopathy checklist, the scale goes from 0 all the way up to 40, 40 being the most psychopathic that a person can be. So just kind of keep that in mind moving forward. and I'm excited to see your psychopathy checklist score after you take the test.